Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Fiddle. I still don't completely have my voice back, but I think it's good enough that I should be able to do this. Today's project is a wardrobe made out of the wire ribbon stuffs, and don't forget to stop by Patreon and pick up the printable pattern and check out the list of materials. This project is pretty easy on the hands, but we will have to be cutting wood at some point. Just like we have with all the other wire ribbon pieces, we need to start with treating our ribbon first with glue and water. This prevents it from falling apart while we're working with it and stiffens it up so it has more structure than what the ribbon does alone. The wardrobe should come out to around 7.5 inches tall, 4 inches long, and 2.5 inches wide. 2.5 inches because that's how wide my ribbon is. Yours may be skinnier, so you may have to add pieces together to get the full width. But don't worry about that now. So I would say probably 7 or 8 strips, at least 7.5 inches long. So that way you have the right length no matter if you're using it for doors or not. I'm using a ruler to straighten my lines out. I've never mentioned that before, but that is how I make sure my ribbon stays straight for the drying process. Once the ribbon's dry, we can start to cut out our pieces, starting with the door panels. Trim all the wired edging off of all of them. Then set them aside. We need to make the hinges next. You'll need 2 strips that are 7.5 inches long and 1 inch wide. These are going to be our 2 longest hinges. I am so glad to be back to talking. I've got some pretty cool things coming up. More on that later. Once you have your strips cut out, fold them in half lengthwise, or hot dog style as my art teacher used to call it. This should be enough space to fit a skewer inside and be able to close all the way around it with no problem. Lay it against a ruler or your craft mat. I laid mine out to where I had 1/4 inch on each end and marked the 1 inch intervals. Then cut along the lines. For the other 7.5 inch long hinge, don't worry about cutting it like this. We want to keep it solid all the way across because there isn't another door on the other side. We'll get to that one in a few minutes. Once you have them all cut, we can glue them to our skewer. We need to make sure that they are still able to move. We don't want to glue the stick and the ribbon to each other. And just like always when working with super glue, you're probably going to glue your fingers to the project. Now we can attach the hinge to one side or one panel of our door. You want to go every other flap so that way on the other side you can attach it to the other door. I went with tacky glue on this side, but beware, sometimes it does dry white and that may show through. For the second door panel I wanted to Insta-Stick, so I went back to super glue. Once you have these two panels put together, set it aside. We're going to start with making the back panel of the wardrobe. It should be 7.5 inches tall and 4 inches wide. You will definitely have to add strips together to get the full width. I only needed 2 panels for mine. When you go to add the panels together, make sure and remove the wire trim in between so that way it hides the seam. I did leave the trim on the outside edges of mine just to give it a little bit more detail. Next, cut out the piece of the pattern that shows you where the drawer dividers are. We'll need to mark these on both the sides and back of the wardrobe. I got ahead of myself and glued one side on and then remembered that I needed to do this step. It happens. Next, we're going to move on to tracing and cutting out all the shelves. I kept the trim on one side along where the front edge would be. There should be 4 big ones for the shelves, one for the divider, and then just the 4 little shelves themselves. Once you have them all cut out, we're going to take a break from them and turn back to the actual structure of the wardrobe and glue the sides on. They should be 7.5 inches long and 2.5 inches wide. You may have to add pieces together to get the full width. I know I'm being repetitive and I'm sorry. Set it aside to dry and we're going to turn our attention back to the drawers. If you have stir sticks and they're skinnier than popsicle sticks, just use them instead of using popsicle sticks and breaking them in half. I didn't have any, so this was my solution. We need framework to support these shelves. Unlike the vanity, they're a lot bigger, so they need the extra support of the sticks, otherwise they might sag a bit in the center. When you have all your sticks cut out, Go ahead and cut the corners at a 45-degree angle. Test fit as you go to make sure you're cutting them the right length. I didn't cut out a framework for the wall divider in the middle in the upper portion. I would say go ahead and make one for that as well because I did end up adding a support at the back of the wardrobe and one at the front, though I didn't do one along the top and bottom. While I'm working on that, I wanted to talk to you guys about the next few projects coming up. The next one would be a cold porcelain clay Christmas dinner, where I will be showing you how to start from making the clay all the way to finished product and the upsides and downfalls in the process. Then we're going to come back upstairs to the bedroom, and I'd like to make an old school desk and teacher's chalkboard. There'll probably be two separate tutorials though. I already have the patterns made up, I just have to get the time to sit down and make them. I really would have liked to have been able to add the gingerbread house into it, but it warped while drying, and we will discuss that in the next tutorial. When your shelves are dry, you can start the assembly process. I started from the middle center and worked my way out and up. Now we are ready to work on the top and bottom. Go ahead and cut your pieces out, and we're going to need a drill or some type of tool to make a hole at the end of the popsicle stick. It needs to be big enough that our skewers can fit through. If your piece splits in this process, it's okay. It'll actually be easier for us later, but if not, don't worry about it. We'll cut it in half. Now lay it along the bottom or top base, measure and cut off the end. Okay, I had to get real close for this next part. Take your ruler and line it up just on the other side of your hole and mark all the way down your popsicle stick. Now draw a curved line from the other side of the hole back to your line you made already. Flip it around to the other end and give yourself a marking about the same distance as the hole on the other end. We will be drilling a hole there too, but not quite yet. Take your ruler and line it up with the hole just like we did on the other side. Draw your line across. Flip it around to the other end and follow your curve as before, leaving the gap in between. It should look something like this. You will need two of them, so you can either go ahead and trace out the next one now or wait until you have this one cut out and then trace it. And that's what I did. Please be careful with the next part. We need to cut out the center channeling. If you would like, and it may make it easier, you can go ahead and cut your popsicle stick in half. We can glue it back together later. Once we got our pieces shaped, we're going to glue them to another popsicle stick. This is going to give us a stopping point so that way our skewers don't have room to float around. Next, frame in the top and bottom pieces. I went ahead and left my popsicle sticks whole instead of cutting them in half this time. Set them aside to dry, and we're going to move back to the doors. Remember the solid hinge that we were talking about at the beginning of the video? We're going to go ahead and glue our skewer inside of it. For this one, it really doesn't matter if the skewer and ribbon are stuck together because it'll only be attached to one door hinge. And this is where I messed up on mine. Before you glue the hinge on, lay the door centered over the wardrobe, then take your hinge and lay it where it needs to be for the doors to still be even. Another way to measure out or make sure that your door is the right size is to use the slide guide that we just got done making. Center it over the center of your door before you glue the long hinge on because you want to use the holes as your guide to where you need to glue it down, and that will be shorter than what the door is now. Live and learn. Now we are ready to make the next hinge. We're going to do it just the same way as we did before. I am missing footage making the last panel and hinge, but go ahead and attach those after you do this one. Our top and bottom panel should be dry enough to where we can glue down our guides. It took me a minute to figure out exactly how and where to glue them. You want to make sure that the hole for both the top and bottom are on the same side. When they are dry, we're ready to glue them to the wardrobe. As soon as it dried, I had to test out the door to make sure that it worked. And I'm glad to say, even though I messed it up, it does still work. I cut a trim for both the top and bottom just to cover up the wood pieces. I used a bit of mirror that I had left from making the vanity and put it on the inside of the door. Then I added the trim that I had used for the vanity all around the door. I will say though that if you add it on the sections of the hinge, go every other one. You don't want to glue straight down the line because then you'll glue your hinge in place and you won't be able to use your door. Because there isn't as much available space on the inside, I cut more door panels and glued them down so that way it covered up the hinge and made it look nicer. I did add the white trim around the mirror. Grab your pliers and wire and we're going to make the door handle. I used a thick piece of aluminum and bent it at a right angle using the pliers as a guide for the width, then wrapped it with copper wire. This did take some time to, but I really liked the way that it looked in the end, so it was worth it. I used 2 round flat beads to finish off the edges and give me a bigger surface to glue to. While I was test fitting the door, I realized that there was this small gap between the outside wall and where the hinge stops. Because we want to make sure our drawers fit right and don't get stuck, I went ahead and put a little strip of ribbon along that area. While that was drying, I went back and gave the handle a coat of rose gold paint to match the vanity. I didn't put any paint on the bottom side because that's where we're going to be gluing. Speaking of gluing, I really wasn't sure exactly where to put this. I didn't know if I should put it closer to the opening or if I should put it in the middle of the door. I just didn't know. So I put it right smack dab in the middle. For the drawers, I cannot give you an accurate size because of that one strip that we have to add inside on the other side of the door. That changes how big your door is going to be, but they will be 2 inches from front to back. Side to side is where we don't have the measurements. I made the drawers themselves out of cereal box or chipboard cardboard. Then I made a little front piece out of the ribbon and gave them a trim all the way around, just like the vanity drawers. I ended up not putting handles on these drawers. I originally was going to make ones like we did for the vanity, but I figured there wouldn't be enough room because of the door and the wire's a little thin to be stretching a span that far. I might actually just put a few oval beads cut in half there. We need to make a coat clothing rack line for the larger side of the cabinet. I used the same beads that I did for the outside handle and a toothpick to make this. I used super glue and baking soda since we're gluing 2 hard surfaces together, and we'll be painting it in just a minute so you won't even be able to tell. To keep everything cohesive, I went through and painted the wire wrap trim with a bit of rose gold. There's only a few more things left to do, and that is attach the front to the drawers and finally glue the clothes rack in place. And with that, it brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope this gives you some ideas for your next project, and if you plan to make one for yourself, please send me a picture. I would love to see it. If you haven't already, please consider becoming a subscriber. It'll keep you updated on all my new projects. If you would like to support me even further, please check out my Patreon and becoming a member. There are some great benefits to it. I hope to have the next tutorial on Christmas Day where we will be making a cold porcelain clay Christmas dinner. I'm really excited for that one. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. Thank you, Ginger, and I'll see you next time.